The medical bay of the Vorthak dreadnought Crimson Fawn hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced alien technology. Holographic displays cast blue light across chrome surfaces while neural scanners monitored every synapse of the patient lying motionless on the biobed. Commander Kael'tar stood beside the bed, his massive frame casting a shadow over the small form of his mate. Lyra Esh had once been the pride of the Vorthak Medical Corps. Her silver fur had gleamed like starlight, and her amber eyes had held the sharp intelligence that made her one of the finest neural surgeons in the Empire. Now, those same eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, recognition flickering in and out like a dying star. The disease had a clinical name in Vorthak medical texts: synaptic cascade deterioration. The neural pathways that connected her consciousness to her body were dissolving, one connection at a time. It was progressive, irreversible, and, according to every medical expert in the Empire, untreatable. The degradation has accelerated, Dr. Morthek reported, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. He was the finest neurological specialist the Vorthak had produced in 2 centuries, yet his ears drooped with helplessness. Her motor functions are now at 12%. Cognitive recognition hovers around 30%. I estimate she has perhaps 20 cycles before complete neural shutdown. Kael'tar's clawed hands clenched into fists. 20 cycles. Less than 2 standard months. He had commanded fleets through the chaos of the border wars, had stared down enemy dreadnoughts without flinching, but watching Lyra Esh fade away day by day was breaking something inside him that he had not known could break. There must be something, he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having problems solved through sheer force of will. Some treatment we have not tried. Some technology we can acquire. Dr. Morthek's expression grew pained. Commander, we have exhausted every option. Cybernetic integration is impossible due to her neural instability. Genetic reconstruction would require her to survive the process, which her current condition makes unlikely. Even suspended animation would only delay the inevitable. Kael'tar turned away from the medical readouts, unable to bear seeing the steady decline in every metric that mattered. Through the viewport, the stars wheeled slowly as the dreadnought maintained its patrol route along the frontier. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between worlds, was there truly nothing that could save her? Sir, came a voice from behind him. Sub-Commander Zethrin entered the medical bay, his young features marked with the kind of desperate hope that only came from those who had not yet learned that hope could be a cruelty. I may have found something. Kael'tar spun around, his predatory instincts focused entirely on his subordinate. Speak. Zethrin approached nervously, holding a data tablet. I have been researching every medical database in the Kepler sector, sir. Cross-referencing any species that has dealt with neural degenerative conditions similar to what affects Lady Lyra Esh. And? The word came out as more of a snarl than Kael'tar intended. I found references to a species called humans, sir. They are from a system called Sol, on the very edge of our territorial boundaries. According to the data, they have achieved remarkable results treating neural conditions that other species consider terminal. Dr. Morthek snorted dismissively. Humans? They are barely out of their planetary infancy. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. What could they possibly offer that our medical science cannot provide? Zethrin's ears flattened slightly, but he pressed on. That is what makes it interesting, sir. They do not rely on advanced technology for these treatments. According to the reports, their approach is different. More direct. They call it hands-on medicine and combine it with something they term bedside manner. Kael'tar studied the data tablet, scanning through reports that seemed almost too primitive to be real. Humans used something called physical therapy and emotional support as medical treatments. They employed encouragement as if it were a drug. Most bizarrely, they seemed to believe that a patient's will to fight could influence the outcome of their treatment. To a Vorthak mindset, trained in the logical application of superior technology, it sounded like superstition. This is absurd, Dr. Morthek declared. They are suggesting that positive thinking can overcome neural degeneration. It goes against every principle of medical science. But Kael'tar was remembering something. During the border wars, he had encountered human forces exactly once. The engagement had been brief, but something about their behavior had stuck with him. Where other species would retreat when faced with overwhelming odds, the humans had not just fought, they had improvised, adapted, found ways to turn disadvantage into advantage through sheer bloody-minded determination. Their technology had been inferior. Their ships smaller. their weapons less sophisticated. But they had fought with a ferocity that seemed to defy logic, as if they could will victory into existence through sheer refusal to accept defeat. "Where is the nearest human settlement?" Kael'thar asked quietly. Zethrin consulted his tablet. "A research station called Haven Point, sir. It is approximately 6 days' travel through hyperspace. But, sir, they are technically in neutral space. Making contact could be seen as a violation of the Concordat treaties." Kael'thar looked back at Lyra. Her breathing was shallow, and, even in unconsciousness, her face was twisted with pain. The neural degradation was accelerating, and soon she would not even have moments of lucidity. 20 cycles. "Lay in a course for Haven Point," he commanded. "Sir?" Zethrin looked uncertain. "Should I inform Fleet Command of our deviation from patrol?" Kael'thar's amber eyes fixed on his subordinate with predatory intensity. "You will do no such thing. As far as Fleet Command is concerned, we are conducting a routine deep space patrol. Our communications array is experiencing technical difficulties." Dr. Morthek stepped forward, his expression alarmed. "Commander, I must protest. Taking Lady Lyra to a primitive human facility could endanger her life. Their medical standards cannot possibly meet." "She is dying," Kael'thar interrupted, his voice cutting through the medical bay like a blade. "Every day that passes, more of her slips away. If our advanced medicine cannot save her, then perhaps it is time to try something that makes no sense." He moved to Lyra's bedside and took her hand in his massive claws. For just a moment, her eyes focused on his face, and he saw a flicker of the intelligence and strength that had made him fall in love with her. "I will not lose you," he whispered in the old language of their pack bonds. "Not without trying everything." Her fingers tightened weakly around his, and he chose to interpret it as agreement. The Crimson Fawn altered course, its massive bulk disappearing into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. Behind them, the patrol route they should have been following remained empty, while ahead lay a species known throughout the galaxy for their stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. What none of them realized was that they were about to encounter humanity's greatest weapon, not their technology or their tactics, but their unshakable belief that every life was worth fighting for, no matter how long the odds or how hopeless the situation appeared. In the medical bay, Lyra slept on, unaware that her mate had just set in motion events that would change the relationship between their species forever. And, in the depths of space, the Crimson Fawn raced toward a small human station where someone was about to prove that miracles did not require advanced technology. They only required someone who cared enough to refuse to give up. Dr. Sarah Chen finished her third double shift in a row and wanted nothing more than to collapse into her narrow bunk aboard Haven Point Research Station. The coffee in her mug had long since gone cold, but she continued to sip it anyway, savoring the bitter taste that kept her alert enough to finish updating patient files. Haven Point was not exactly the assignment she had imagined when she graduated from medical school. Located on the very edge of human space, the station served primarily as a research facility studying alien biology and as an emergency medical stop for ships traveling the dangerous frontier routes. Most days, her biggest challenge was treating miners with lung problems or traders who had gotten into bar fights. Today had been different. A Calarian freighter had arrived with half their crew suffering from radiation poisoning after their shielding failed. Sarah had worked for 18 hours straight, using every technique she knew and several she had improvised on the spot to stabilize them. The Calarians had different physiology than humans, but pain was universal, and determination could bridge the gap between species. She was finally ready to call it a day when her communicator chirped with an incoming priority message. "Dr. Chen to Station Command," came the voice of Commander Williams, the station's military liaison. "We have a situation." Sarah set down her coffee and activated her comm unit. "What kind of situation?" "Long-range sensors are picking up a massive vessel approaching our position. Configuration unknown, but it is big enough to vaporize our station without breaking stride. They are requesting permission to dock and are specifically asking for medical assistance." Sarah rubbed her tired eyes. "Species? That is where it gets interesting. They identify themselves as Vorthak." Sarah's exhaustion vanished instantly. The Vorthak Empire was legendary throughout this sector of the galaxy, a militaristic species known for their technological superiority and their policy of viewing other races as either useful allies or acceptable losses. They had never sought medical assistance from humans before. "Do we know what kind of medical assistance?" she asked. "Negative. They are not being very communicative beyond requesting our finest neural specialist. Which, according to our records, would be you. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. She was the station's only neural specialist because she was the station's only doctor with any advanced neurological training. Haven Point was not exactly a medical center of excellence. Sir, my neurological experience consists of treating concussions, the occasional seizure disorder, and one very memorable case involving a trader who thought he could perform his own brain surgery after drinking too much Andorian ale. Well, doctor, you are about to get some on-the-job training. The Vorthack vessel is requesting permission to dock. How do you want to handle this? Sarah looked around her small medical bay. She had basic equipment, a lot of determination, and absolutely no idea what she was getting herself into. But there was a universal truth in medicine that transcended species boundaries: when someone asked for help, you provided it if you could. Grant them docking permission, she said. And, Commander? You might want to have security standing by. Just in case. Understood. Chen, whatever is happening here, be careful. The Vorthack do not ask for help unless something has gone very wrong. As Sarah began preparing her medical bay for an alien patient with unknown conditions, she had no idea that she was about to encounter a love story that spanned the stars, or that her simple human determination was about to challenge everything the most advanced species in the sector believed about medicine, technology, and the power of refusing to give up hope. The docking bay of Haven Point had never hosted anything larger than a Calarian transport, so when the Crimson Fong extended its docking tube, the entire station shuddered with the stress. Sarah Chen stood in the airlock, medical kit in hand, trying to calm her nerves as she waited to meet her first Vorthack patient. She had read everything the station's database contained about Vorthack physiology during the 20 minutes it took them to dock. Wolf-like bipeds, averaging 8 feet in height, with enhanced cardiovascular systems and neural structures that processed information at roughly 3 times human speed. Their society was built around pack hierarchies, and they valued strength, efficiency, and technological superiority above all else. None of that prepared her for the reality of Commander Kael'tar when the airlock cycled open. He was massive, even by Vorthack standards. Dark fur covered his muscular frame, and amber eyes studied her with predatory intensity. Behind him stood 2 other Vorthack, one clearly medical personnel based on his equipment, the other younger and nervous. But Sarah's attention was immediately drawn to the figure floating on a medical gurney between them. The female Vorthack on the gurney was small by their standards, perhaps 6 feet tall, with silver fur that had lost its luster. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, occasionally tracking movement but without recognition or focus. Even without understanding Vorthack expressions, Sarah could see the pain etched into her features. I am Commander Kael'tar of the Vorthack Empire, the large male said in accented but clear English. This is my mate, Lyra. She requires medical assistance that our technology cannot provide. Sarah nodded professionally, falling into step beside the gurney as they moved toward her medical bay. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Can you describe her symptoms and the progression of her condition? The Vorthack medical officer, who introduced himself as Dr. Morthek, provided a clinical rundown that made Sarah's heart sink. Synaptic cascade deterioration was unlike anything in human medical literature, but the symptoms were familiar enough. Progressive loss of motor function, cognitive decline, neural pathway destruction. It sounded like a combination of ALS, Alzheimer's, and multiple sclerosis all rolled into a single devastating package. How long has she been symptomatic? Sarah asked as they transferred Lyra to her medical bed. 47 cycles, Kael'tar replied. Approximately 4 of your months. The progression has accelerated in recent weeks. Sarah began her examination, starting with basic neurological responses. Lyra's pupil reactions were sluggish but present. Her reflexes were almost non-existent. When Sarah gently took her hand and asked her to squeeze, there was only the faintest pressure in response. Dr. Morthek, she said, studying the Vorthack medical data on her tablet. Your treatment approach seems to have focused primarily on technological intervention. Cybernetic enhancement, genetic therapy, neural pathway reconstruction. Naturally, Dr. Morthek replied, though there was confusion in his tone. What other approach would there be? Sarah looked up from her examination. Have you tried physical therapy? Occupational therapy? Any form of rehabilitation that focuses on retraining existing neural pathways rather than replacing them? The silence that followed was telling. Dr. Morthak's ears flattened against his skull. Dr. Chen, with respect, neural pathways that are damaged cannot be retrained. The synaptic connections have been severed. It is a matter of basic medical science. In human medicine, we have seen remarkable recovery from neural damage through intensive rehabilitation, Sarah said carefully. The brain is more adaptable than we often give it credit for. Even when primary pathways are damaged, secondary and tertiary connections can sometimes be strengthened to compensate. Kael'tar's eyes sharpened. You have treated conditions like this before? Not exactly like this, Sarah admitted. But I have worked with stroke patients, traumatic brain injury cases, and degenerative neurological conditions. The human approach focuses on working with what remains rather than replacing what is lost. Dr. Morthak made a sound that might have been skeptical laughter. Dr. Chen, I appreciate your willingness to help, but Lady Lyroesh's condition is far beyond what your primitive rehabilitation techniques could address. We are dealing with complete synaptic failure, not simple damage. Sarah felt a familiar spark of irritation. She had heard variations of that dismissive tone before, from specialists who believed that advanced technology was always superior to hands-on care, from administrators who thought medicine should be practiced from behind computer screens, from colleagues who could not understand why she chose to work on a frontier station instead of a prestigious medical center. Dr. Morthak, she said, keeping her voice level. May I ask what your patient success rate has been with technological intervention for this condition? The Vorthak physician's ears flattened further. The condition is considered terminal. There have been no successful treatments. Then, perhaps, Sarah said gently, it might be worth trying something different. She turned to Kael'tar, who had been watching the exchange with intense focus. Commander, I need you to understand something. I cannot promise that anything I do will help. Your mate's condition is severe, and I am working outside my area of expertise. But, if you are willing to trust me, I would like to try an approach that focuses on stimulation, engagement, and incremental improvement rather than technological replacement. Kael'tar studied her for a long moment. What would this approach involve? Daily physical therapy sessions to maintain and, potentially improve motor function. Cognitive exercises designed to stimulate neural activity. Environmental enrichment to encourage brain plasticity. And... Sarah hesitated, knowing how the next part would sound to alien ears. Intensive personal interaction. Conversation, music, familiar scents and sounds. Anything that might help her brain remember how to make connections. You are suggesting that talking to her will cure a degenerative neural condition? Dr. Morthak asked, incredulity clear in his voice. I am suggesting that the brain responds to stimulation in ways we do not fully understand, Sarah replied. In human medicine, we have documented cases of patients recovering from apparently hopeless conditions when they were surrounded by people who refused to give up on them. Kael'tar moved to Lyraesh's side and took her hand. For a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in the patient's eyes, a brief spark of recognition before it faded. How long would this treatment take? He asked. I do not know, Sarah said honestly. It could take weeks, months, or it might not work at all. But, Commander, if your medical technology has reached its limits, then, we need to try something that does not rely on technology. Dr. Morthak began to object, but Kael'tar silenced him with a gesture. Dr. Chen, you say this approach requires personal interaction. Would this mean that I could participate in her treatment? Sarah nodded. In fact, your participation would be essential. You know her better than anyone. You know what makes her happy, what motivates her, what she cares about. In human medicine, we have learned that the emotional connection between patient and loved ones can be one of our most powerful tools. Something shifted in Kael'tar's expression. For the first time since entering her medical bay, Sarah saw hope replace desperation in his amber eyes. Dr. Morthak, Kael'tar commanded. You will assist Dr. Chen with whatever she requires. That is in order. The Vorthak physician's protests died in his throat. He nodded reluctantly. Yes, sir. Sarah looked down at Lyraesh, whose breathing had steadied slightly since they had been talking. There was still no recognition in her eyes, but something about her posture seemed less rigid. All right, Sarah said, rolling up her sleeves. Let's start with the basics. Commander, I need you to tell me about your mate. What did she love? What made her laugh? What were her dreams? As Kael'thar began to speak about Lyra, her brilliant mind, her gentle humor, her passion for healing others, Sarah started to formulate a treatment plan that had nothing to do with advanced technology and everything to do with the most basic human belief that love, determination, and refusal to surrender could work miracles that no machine could replicate. In the medical bay of a small frontier station, 3 species were about to discover whether the human approach to impossible situations could succeed where the galaxy's most advanced medical science had failed. The first therapy session began simply. Sarah had moved Lyra to a more comfortable position, propped up so she could see around the room. The harsh medical lighting had been dimmed and replaced with warmer illumination that Kael'thar said reminded him of their homeworld sunset. The key, Sarah explained as she worked, is consistent stimulation. We want to give her brain as many reasons as possible to form new connections. She started with basic physical therapy, gently moving Lyra's arms and legs through range of motion exercises. The Vorthack female offered no resistance, but neither did she help. Her muscles were weak from weeks of inactivity, but Sarah could feel that the underlying strength was still there. Talk to her, Sarah instructed Kael'thar. Tell her what you are doing, where you are, why you brought her here. Kael'thar looked uncertain. She cannot understand. Maybe not consciously, Sarah said, continuing the exercises. But hearing is often one of the last senses to fade. And even if she cannot process the words, she knows your voice. She has heard it for years. It represents safety, love, familiarity. Dr. Morthak watched from the corner, his expression skeptical but interested despite himself. Dr. Chen, what is the scientific basis for believing that familiar sounds can stimulate neural regeneration? Sarah smiled. Dr. Morthak, in human medicine, we have learned that the brain is far more resilient than we once believed. When primary neural pathways are damaged, the brain can sometimes create alternate routes. But it needs motivation to do so. It needs reasons to rebuild. She guided Kael'thar's hands to help with the physical therapy, showing him how to support Lyra's arm as they moved it in slow circles. Love is motivation. Hope is motivation. The sound of a cherished voice, the touch of a gentle hand, these things tell the brain that fighting is worthwhile. As they worked, Kael'thar began to talk. At first, his words were stilted, clinical reports of their journey to Haven Point, updates on fleet movements she could not possibly understand in her current state. But, gradually, his voice warmed, and he began to share memories. He told Lyra about the day they had met, when she was a young medical student and he was a junior officer recovering from wounds sustained in a border skirmish. He described how her eyes had lit up when she explained complex surgical procedures, how she had patiently answered his questions about neural anatomy even though he was just a soldier with no medical training. She always said that healing was not about the tools you used, Kael'thar said softly, gently flexing his mate's fingers. She said it was about understanding what needed to be repaired and finding the best way to repair it. Sarah caught something in his tone. She sounds like she would understand what we are trying to do here. Yes, Kael'thar said. She would approve of your methods, Dr. Chen. Lyra always believed that medicine was as much art as science. As they continued the session, Sarah began to incorporate cognitive exercises. Simple commands: squeeze my hand if you can hear me. Follow this light with your eyes. Try to move your foot. There was no response to any of them, but Sarah was not discouraged. Recovery from severe neural damage was measured in tiny increments, not dramatic breakthroughs. The important thing, she explained, is consistency. We need to do this every day, multiple times a day. The brain needs constant stimulation to begin rebuilding. Dr. Morthak stepped forward. Dr. Chen, I have been observing your techniques. While I remain skeptical, I admit that I am curious about the theoretical framework. Would you be willing to explain your approach in more detail? Sarah nodded, pleased that the Vorthack physician was engaging with her methods rather than simply dismissing them. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, connected by trillions of synapses. When disease or injury damages those connections, we have traditionally focused on replacement or technological intervention. She continued the physical therapy as she spoke, noting that Lyra's muscle tension seemed to be decreasing slightly. But recent research has shown that the brain retains what we call plasticity, the ability to form new connections throughout life. The key is providing the right environment and stimulation to encourage that process. And you believe that emotional stimulation can influence neural regrowth? Dr. Morthak asked. I believe that the brain is not just a biological computer, Sarah replied. It is part of a complex system that includes emotional, social, and environmental factors. When we treat only the damaged tissue and ignore the whole person, we miss opportunities for healing. Kael'thar looked up from where he was gently massaging Lyra Esh's hand. In Vorthack medical training, we learn that efficient treatment requires elimination of variables that cannot be quantified. Emotional factors were classified as irrelevant to physiological outcomes. Sarah paused in her work. Commander, may I ask you something personal? When Lyra Esh was healthy, what made her happiest? Kael'thar thought for a moment. She loved her work. Saving lives, solving complex medical puzzles. But she also loves simple things. The sound of rain on metal. The taste of sweet fruit from our homeworld. The feeling of wind through her fur when we walked in the high valleys. And, when she was afraid or in pain, what comforted her? My presence, Kael'thar said without hesitation. She always said that as long as we were together, everything else was manageable. Sarah nodded. Then, those things, your voice, your touch, the memories of what she loved, they are not irrelevant variables. They are medicine. They are reminders to her brain of what it is fighting to preserve. She showed Kael'thar how to perform gentle scalp massage, explaining that physical touch could stimulate blood flow to the brain and, potentially encourage neural activity. As his claws carefully worked through his mate's silver fur, Sarah saw Lyra Esh's breathing pattern change slightly, becoming deeper, more regular. Dr. Morthek, Sarah said, could you monitor her neural activity while the commander continues the massage? The Vorthack physician activated his scanner, studying the readouts with growing interest. There is a slight increase in theta wave activity in the temporal regions. Not significant by our standards, but measurable. Sarah felt a small surge of hope. In human medicine, we would consider any measurable improvement to be significant. It means her brain is still capable of response. They continued the session for 2 more hours, cycling through physical therapy, cognitive exercises, and simple conversation. By the end, Lyra Esh's vital signs had stabilized, and her muscle tension had decreased noticeably. We will do this again tomorrow, Sarah said as they prepared to move Lyra Esh to quarters that Kael'thar could share with her. And, the day after that. Recovery is not about dramatic moments, it is about small improvements compounding over time. As they settled Lyra Esh into bed in the guest quarters, Kael'thar remained by her side, continuing to talk softly about their life together, their plans for the future, the places they had dreamed of seeing. Dr. Morthek approached Sarah as they left the room. Dr. Chen, I must ask, what gives you hope that this approach will succeed where our technology has failed? Sarah looked back through the open doorway, where Kael'thar sat holding his mate's hand, his voice a low rumble of shared memories and unshakable devotion. Dr. Morthek, she said quietly, in human medicine, we have learned that the most powerful force in the universe is not technology or science. It is someone who loves you enough to refuse to let you go. 3 weeks into treatment, Sarah Chen found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about neural medicine. The improvements in Lyra Esh's condition were subtle but undeniable, and they were happening in ways that challenged conventional medical understanding. The changes had started small. On the 4th day, Lyra Esh had tracked movement with her eyes for a full 30 seconds, the longest sustained focus they had recorded. On the 7th day, her fingers had tightened around Kael'thar's hand in response to his voice. By the 10th day, she was showing primitive reflexive responses to familiar scents. Dr. Morthek had initially attributed these improvements to random neural fluctuations, but his skepticism was eroding as the positive changes continued to accumulate. Today, as they gathered for the morning therapy session, his scanner readings showed neural activity patterns that should have been impossible for someone with synaptic cascade deterioration. The theta wave activity in her temporal lobes has increased by 47%, he reported, unable to keep the wonder from his voice. Her motor cortex is showing spontaneous firing patterns. According to everything we know about this condition, her brain should be deteriorating, not improving. Sarah smiled as she helped Kael'thar position Lyra Esh for the day's physical therapy. Maybe everything you know about this condition is incomplete. But, how? Dr. Morthek pressed. What mechanism could account for neural regeneration at this level? Love, Sarah said simply, beginning the range of motion exercises that had become routine. Hope. The absolute refusal to give up. You cannot quantify these things in your medical databases, but that does not make them less real. Kael'thar had become an active participant in every aspect of Lyraesh's care. He had learned the physical therapy routines, mastered the cognitive exercises, and maintained a constant stream of conversation that ranged from military reports to childhood memories. More importantly, he had never once wavered in his belief that she would recover. "Today we work on vocalization," Sarah announced, settling into the chair beside Lyraesh's bed. "I want to see if we can encourage some verbal response." She had been building toward this goal for days, noting that Lyraesh's throat muscles were becoming more responsive and her breathing patterns suggested increased awareness. The key was finding the right stimulus. "Kael'thar," Sarah said, "I need you to sing to her." The Vorthak commander blinked in surprise. "Sing? You mentioned that she loved music from your homeworld." Familiar melodies can sometimes reach parts of the brain that speech cannot. The neural pathways for music are often preserved even when other functions are compromised. Dr. Morthek looked confused. "Vorthak do not typically incorporate music into medical treatment protocols." "That might be why you have had limited success with neural rehabilitation," Sarah said gently. "The brain is not just a processing unit, it is part of a complex emotional and sensory system. Music engages multiple neural networks simultaneously." Kael'thar hesitated, then began to hum a low, rhythmic melody that resonated deep in his chest. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had heard, part song, part growl, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. The effect on Lyraesh was immediate and dramatic. Her breathing synchronized with the rhythm, her face relaxed, and, for the first time in weeks, her eyes focused directly on her mate's face. "Keep singing," Sarah whispered, hardly daring to breathe. Kael'thar's voice grew stronger, adding words in the ancient Vorthak language, words of love, of devotion, of promises to always protect and cherish. Lyraesh's lips began to move, not quite forming sounds but clearly trying to participate in the familiar ritual. Dr. Morthek's scanner was recording frantically. Neural activity is spiking across all regions. "I am seeing coordinated responses between the auditory cortex, the limbic system, and the motor control centers. This should not be possible." Sarah felt tears threatening as she watched Lyraesh struggle to respond to her mate's song. The effort was enormous, requiring coordination between damaged neural pathways, but she was fighting for every sound. Lyraesh whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably present. Kael'thar stopped singing, his eyes wide with shock and hope. "Lyra? My starlight, can you hear me?" "Light," she managed, the word slurred but recognizable. Sarah had to grip the armrest of her chair to keep from shouting with joy. That is her first vocalization since treatment began. Her brain is rebuilding the pathways necessary for speech. But Dr. Morthek was staring at his scanner readings with confusion that bordered on alarm. "Dr. Chen, these readings are impossible. Neural regeneration simply does not occur at this rate. The damaged synapses cannot have regrown this quickly." Sarah studied the readings, noting patterns she had seen before in human patients with traumatic brain injury. "Dr. Morthek, what if the synapses were not completely destroyed? What if they were simply dormant, waiting for the right stimulus to reactivate them?" "That is not how synaptic cascade deterioration works," Dr. Morthek insisted. "The condition causes irreversible damage." "According to Vorthak medical understanding," Sarah said. "But what if that understanding is based on observing patients who never received the kind of intensive stimulation therapy we have been providing?" She moved to Lyraesh's bedside, where Kael'thar was gently stroking his mate's hand. "Lyraesh, can you squeeze his hand?" The response was weak but deliberate, a clear, intentional movement that represented massive neural coordination. "The key insight," Sarah continued, "is that the brain wants to heal itself. But it needs motivation, stimulation, and, most importantly, it needs to believe that healing is worthwhile. When patients are isolated, when they are treated as collections of symptoms rather than as whole beings, the brain has no incentive to fight." Dr. Morthek was taking detailed notes, his scientific curiosity overriding his skepticism. "You are suggesting that emotional state can influence neural plasticity?" "I am saying that emotional state is neural plasticity," Sarah replied. "The brain does not exist in isolation from the being it serves. When that being has reasons to recover, love to fight for, dreams to pursue, connections to maintain, the brain finds ways to adapt and heal." Over the following days, Lyraesh's improvements accelerated. Her vocabulary expanded from single words to short phrases. Her motor control improved enough for her to feed herself with assistance. Most remarkably, her personality began to emerge from the fog of neural damage. The first time she laughed a weak but genuine sound of amusement at one of Kael'tar's stories, Dr. Morthek nearly dropped his scanner. "Humor requires complex neural integration," he muttered, studying the readouts. "Language processing, emotional recognition, social understanding, memory recall, all coordinating in real time. The damaged areas of her brain should not be capable of this level of integration." "Then, maybe they were never as damaged as you thought," Sarah suggested. "Maybe your medical technology was so focused on replacement and intervention that it never considered the possibility of natural recovery." Sarah had begun documenting everything for what she hoped would eventually become a comprehensive treatment protocol. The combination of physical therapy, cognitive stimulation, emotional support, and environmental enrichment was producing results that challenged fundamental assumptions about neural medicine. But it was the emotional component that seemed most crucial. Whenever Kael'tar was called away for communications with his ship, Lyroesh's progress slowed. When he returned and resumed his constant presence at her side, her improvements accelerated again. "The brain responds to love," Sarah explained to Dr. Morthek during one of their daily consultations. "Not as some mystical force, but as a measurable neurochemical environment that promotes healing. Stress hormones inhibit neural growth. Love and security promote it." Dr. Morthek had filled several data tablets with observations and measurements. "Dr. Chen, if your approach proves consistently effective, it will revolutionize Vorthack medical practice. We will need to completely restructure our treatment protocols." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on a new development. Lyra was beginning to ask questions, simple ones about where she was, what had happened to her, how long she had been sick. Her memory was returning in patches, like clouds clearing from a landscape. "Kale," she said one afternoon, her voice stronger than it had been in months, "why are we on a human station?" Kael'tar took her hand, his amber eyes bright with tears he did not bother to hide. "Because human medicine saved you when ours could not." Lyra looked around the medical bay, taking in the simple equipment, the basic facilities, the warm lighting that was so different from the sterile efficiency of Vorthack medical centers. "How?" she asked. Sarah approached the bed, smiling at her patient who was finally, truly present for the first time since treatment began. "We reminded your brain what it was fighting for." That evening, as Lyra slept peacefully in her mate's arms, Dr. Morthek approached Sarah with something that might have been humility. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I dismissed your methods as primitive superstition." "I was wrong." Sarah shook her head. "You were not wrong to be skeptical. What we have accomplished here challenges everything medical science taught both of us. But sometimes the most advanced approach is the one that remembers that patients are not just biological systems, they are beings with hopes, fears, dreams, and connections that matter more than any technology." Dr. Morthek nodded slowly. "I would like to request permission to remain on Haven Point for an extended period. I need to learn these techniques properly." "Of course," Sarah said. "But, Dr. Morthek, remember that the techniques are only part of it. The real medicine is believing that every patient deserves someone who will fight for them, no matter how hopeless the situation appears." As the two physicians stood watching Kael'tar and Lyra sleep together for the first time in months, neither of them realized that word of the miraculous recovery was already spreading through the Vorthack fleet. Soon, they would discover that the implications of their success reached far beyond one patient and one love story. They had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to accept that any situation was truly hopeless as long as someone cared enough to keep fighting. The transmission from Vorthack Fleet Command arrived 6 weeks into Lyroesh's treatment, and its tone made Commander Kael'tar's ears flatten against his skull in apprehension. "Commander Kael'tar, you will explain your extended absence from patrol duties immediately. Fleet Command is dispatching the dreadnought Iron Claw to your coordinates to conduct an investigation." Sarah Chen looked up from where she was working with Lyra on fine motor coordination exercises, noting the tension that had suddenly filled the room. Lyra could now walk short distances with assistance, carry on simple conversations, and had regained most of her cognitive functions. But she was still fragile, and stress could potentially undo weeks of progress. "How much trouble are we in?" Sarah asked quietly. Dr. Morthek, who had become an enthusiastic convert to human medical methods, consulted his data tablet. "The Iron Claw is under the command of Admiral Gorthax. He is known for strict adherence to military protocol and skepticism toward unconventional approaches. Kael'thar moved protectively closer to his mate. I will handle the Admiral. Lyra Esh's recovery speaks for itself. Kael, Lyra Esh said, her voice still soft but clear. What did you tell them about where we are? That we were investigating a potential security threat on the frontier, Kael'thar admitted. It was not entirely false, we were investigating whether human medicine posed a threat to our understanding of what was possible. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She had heard about Vorthak military discipline from her medical texts. Unauthorized deviation from orders was considered a serious offense, and taking a dreadnought into neutral space without permission could be seen as an act of insubordination that warranted severe consequences. Commander, she said, if there is going to be trouble with your superiors, maybe you should consider completing Lyra Esh's treatment elsewhere. I can provide you with a complete protocol document. No, Kael'thar said firmly. Whatever consequences I face for my actions, they are worth facing. You saved her life, Dr. Chen. The Empire needs to understand what that means. The Iron Claw arrived 12 hours later, its massive bulk dwarfing even the Crimson Fong as it took position near Haven Point Station. Admiral Gorthax transported aboard with a full security detail, his presence filling the small station corridors like a barely contained storm. He was older than Kael'thar, with gray streaking through his dark fur and scars marking his muzzle from decades of military service. His amber eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who had never learned to doubt the efficiency of traditional Vorthak methods. Commander Kael'thar, Admiral Gorthax began without preamble, you will explain why you have abandoned your assigned patrol to bring your mate to a primitive human medical facility. Kael'thar stood at attention, but his voice was steady. Sir, Lady Lyra Esh was dying of synaptic cascade deterioration. Our medical corps had exhausted all treatment options. I sought alternative care. From humans? The Admiral's tone carried all the disdain that centuries of Vorthak technological superiority could muster. You risked an Imperial dreadnought and violated treaty boundaries because you believed that primitives could succeed where our finest physicians had failed? Sir, I would like you to meet my mate. Admiral Gorthax turned toward the medical bay, clearly expecting to see a terminal patient being kept comfortable in her final days. Instead, he found Lyra Esh sitting upright in bed, working through cognitive exercises with Dr. Chen while Dr. Morthek took detailed notes. The shock on the Admiral's face was immediately replaced by suspicion. Explain this, he commanded. Dr. Morthek stepped forward, his scientific integrity overriding his fear of superior officers. Sir, I have documented Lady Lyra Esh's complete recovery from advanced synaptic cascade deterioration using human medical techniques. The results challenge everything we thought we knew about neural medicine. Recovery? Admiral Gorthax examined Lyra Esh with the eye of someone who had seen too many false hopes in military medicine. She appears alert, but that proves nothing. Many terminal patients have brief periods of apparent improvement. Lyra Esh looked up at the Admiral, her eyes bright with intelligence and humor. Admiral Gorthax, with respect, I am not having a brief period of improvement. 6 weeks ago, I could not speak, could not move voluntarily, and could barely recognize my own mate. Today, I can walk, talk, think, and remember everything I was before this disease tried to take it from me. To demonstrate, she stood carefully from the bed and took several independent steps across the room before returning to sit beside her mate. The movement was deliberate, controlled, and impossible for someone with advanced neural degeneration. Admiral Gorthax stared in stunned silence. Sarah stepped forward. Admiral, I am Dr. Sarah Chen, the physician who has been treating Lyra Esh. I understand that this outcome challenges your medical understanding, but I assure you that her recovery is real and sustainable. How? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Dr. Morthek activated his medical scanner, displaying readings that showed fully functional neural activity across all measured parameters. Sir, human medicine approaches neural damage differently than ours. Instead of focusing on technological replacement, they stimulate natural healing through intensive therapy, emotional support, and environmental enrichment. They use love as medicine, Kael'thar added quietly. They believe that the brain heals better when the patient has reasons to fight. Admiral Gorthax studied the scanner readings, his military mind trying to process information that contradicted decades of accepted medical science. Dr. Morthek, are you telling me that these humans achieved results our entire medical establishment considers impossible? Yes, sir. And I have been learning their techniques. Admiral, we could revolutionize Vorthack medicine with these approaches. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling around them. This was about more than one patient's recovery. This was about whether an entire civilization would be willing to reconsider fundamental assumptions about healing, technology, and the importance of emotional connections in medical care. Admiral, she said carefully, would you like me to explain the treatment protocol we used? For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked the Admiral through every aspect of Lyroesh's care. She explained the importance of consistent stimulation, the role of emotional support in neural plasticity, the power of hope as a factor in recovery. She showed him the daily therapy routines, the cognitive exercises, the environmental modifications that had created conditions for healing. Admiral Gorthax asked technical questions with the precision of a military strategist, but Sarah could see something shifting in his expression as he began to understand the elegant simplicity of the human approach. Dr. Chen, he said finally, you are telling me that the key factor in Lady Lyroesh's recovery was the presence and dedication of someone who loved her? That was certainly a crucial component, Sarah confirmed. The brain responds to emotional security by creating conditions favorable to healing. When patients feel isolated or hopeless, recovery becomes much more difficult. And this approach works for other neural conditions? We have had success with stroke recovery, traumatic brain injury, and various degenerative conditions. The principles remain the same: intensive stimulation, emotional support, and the belief that improvement is possible. Admiral Gorthax was silent for a long time, studying data readings that proved the impossible had become routine. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that would echo through the Empire. Dr. Chen, I am formally requesting that you accompany us back to the Vorthack homeworld as a medical consultant. Our physicians need to learn these techniques. Sarah blinked in surprise. Admiral, I am flattered, but I am not qualified to train your medical corps. I am just one doctor working with limited resources. You are the doctor who saved a life that our entire medical establishment had written off as hopeless, Admiral Gorthax replied. Dr. Chen, what you have accomplished here represents more than medical innovation. You have demonstrated that there are approaches to healing that we never considered because they did not fit our technological paradigms. He turned to Kael'tar. Commander, your unauthorized actions violated protocol and could have created diplomatic incidents. Under normal circumstances, you would face court-martial. Kael'tar straightened, prepared to accept whatever consequences his choices had earned. However, the Admiral continued, your actions have also revealed medical knowledge that could save countless lives throughout the Empire. I am recommending you for commendation rather than court-martial. Lyroesh took her mate's hand, her eyes shining with pride and relief. Admiral Gorthax looked around the small medical bay of Haven Point Station, taking in the basic equipment and simple facilities that had produced a miracle. Dr. Chen, we Vorthack have always believed that superior technology was the answer to every problem. You have shown us that sometimes the most advanced solution is the one that remembers what healing actually means. Sarah nodded slowly. Admiral, I would be honored to share what I know with your physicians. But I need you to understand that this approach requires more than learning new techniques. It requires accepting that patients are not just biological systems to be repaired, they are beings with emotions, relationships, and dreams that are essential parts of the healing process. Then, that is what we will learn, Admiral Gorthax said firmly. The Empire has conquered 47 star systems through superior technology and military strategy. Perhaps it is time we learn to conquer suffering through superior compassion. As plans were made for Sarah to travel to the Vorthack homeworld, she realized that Lyroesh's recovery had become something much larger than one medical success story. It had become the catalyst for a fundamental shift in how an entire civilization thought about healing, hope, and the power of refusing to give up on each other. The human's greatest strength was about to transform not just Vorthack medicine, but the very soul of their society. 6 months after leaving Haven Point Station, Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the Vorthack Imperial Medical Assembly, looking out at an audience of 300 of the Empire's finest physicians. The grand amphitheater on the Vorthack homeworld was a marvel of crystalline architecture, but Sarah's attention was focused on the faces before her, intelligent, skeptical, and desperately curious about the techniques that had challenged everything they thought they knew about neural medicine. The human approach to medicine, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the advanced acoustics of the chamber, is based on a simple principle that your technology has made you forget: healing is not just about repairing damage. It is about restoring the whole being. Dr. Morthek, who had become her primary collaborator and translator of concepts between species, activated holographic displays showing Lyra-Escha's neural scans from her treatment. The progression from nearly complete synaptic failure to full functionality was dramatic enough to draw murmurs of amazement from the assembled physicians. As you can see, Sarah continued, the improvement in neural connectivity was not achieved through technological intervention. Instead, we created conditions that allowed the patient's own healing mechanisms to function optimally. She clicked to the next display, showing the treatment protocol they had developed during their months of collaboration. The key components are intensive physical stimulation, cognitive challenges, emotional support, and, most importantly, the constant presence of someone who believes in the patient's potential for recovery. Dr. Vecthor, the Empire's chief medical officer, raised a clawed hand. Dr. Chen, while Lady Lyra-Escha's recovery is impressive, how do we know this approach will work for other patients? One successful case does not establish a reliable treatment protocol. Sarah smiled. An excellent question, Dr. Vecthor. Dr. Morthek, would you share our additional results? Dr. Morthek stepped forward, his bearing carrying the confidence of a physician who had seen impossible things become routine. Over the past 6 months, we have treated 47 additional cases of advanced neural degeneration using Dr. Chen's protocols. 38 patients have shown significant improvement. 22 have achieved what we would classify as complete functional recovery. The silence in the amphitheater was profound. A treatment success rate of 80% for conditions previously considered terminal was revolutionary by any medical standard. The key insight, Dr. Morthek continued, is that Vorthack medicine has focused on replacing damaged systems rather than supporting natural repair mechanisms. Dr. Chen's approach works with the brain's inherent plasticity rather than against it. Dr. Yathara, a specialist in cybernetic medical enhancement, stood up. But, Dr. Chen, how do you account for cases where the neural damage is too extensive for natural repair? Surely there are limits to what emotional support can achieve. Sarah nodded. Absolutely. This approach is not a miracle cure for every condition. But, we have found that many cases we classified as hopeless were actually cases where we had given up too early. When patients and families are told that nothing can be done, the healing process stops. When they are told that improvement is possible with effort and time, remarkable recoveries can occur. She gestured to the viewing gallery, where Kael'thar and Lyra-Escha sat together. Lyra-Escha had not only recovered her full cognitive and physical function but had returned to practicing medicine herself, becoming one of the most effective advocates for the new treatment approaches. The other crucial factor, Sarah continued, is training family members to participate actively in the healing process. Commander Kael'thar was not just a concerned relative observing his mate's treatment, he became an essential part of the medical team. Kael'thar stood, addressing his fellow Vorthack with military precision. Fellow warriors, I learned that fighting for someone's life requires different weapons than fighting enemies in space. Patience, consistency, hope, and absolute refusal to surrender, these became my primary tools. The result speaks for itself. Lyra-Escha rose beside him, her silver fur gleaming under the chamber's lighting. I want to address my fellow physicians directly. 6 months ago, I was dying from a condition that our best medical science considered incurable. Today, I am not just alive, I am practicing medicine again, using techniques that combine our technological advantages with human insights about the healing process. She activated her own holographic display, showing comparative treatment outcomes. The data is clear. Patients treated with combined technological and emotional support protocols show consistently better outcomes than those receiving purely technological intervention. We have been missing a crucial component of effective medicine. Dr. Zorthak, an elderly physician known for his traditional views, spoke up. Lady Lyra-Escha, you describe emotional support as if it were a quantifiable medical intervention. How do we standardize something as variable as hope or love? Lyra-Escha smiled. Dr. Zorthak, we do not standardize the emotion itself. We standardize the behaviors that generate positive emotional states. Consistent presence, active listening, physical contact when appropriate, environmental enrichment, and, most importantly, treating patients as complete beings rather than collections of symptoms. Sarah stepped forward again. Dr. Zorthak, in human medicine, we have learned to measure the effects of emotional states on healing even when we cannot quantify the emotions themselves. Stress hormones inhibit tissue repair and immune function. Hormones associated with positive emotional states promote healing and neural plasticity. She displayed charts showing neurochemical changes in patients receiving emotional support versus those in isolation. The biological effects are measurable and consistent across species. Love may not be quantifiable, but its healing effects certainly are. Dr. Morthak activated the next section of their presentation. We have also discovered that this approach works synergistically with our existing technology. Patients receiving both advanced medical intervention and intensive emotional support show better outcomes than either approach alone. The presentation continued for another hour, covering case studies, treatment protocols, training procedures for family involvement, and guidelines for integrating emotional support into standard medical practice. The questions from the assembled physicians grew increasingly detailed and practical, indicating acceptance of the fundamental concepts and focus on implementation. Finally, Dr. Vekthor stood for his closing remarks. Dr. Chen, 6 months ago, when Admiral Gorthax first reported your treatment of Lady Lyra Esch, many of us dismissed it as an anomaly. Today, you have presented evidence that challenges the foundation of Vorthack medical practice. He paused, looking around the amphitheater at his colleagues. But change is not always comfortable, even when it is necessary. Dr. Chen, what support would you need to establish a permanent training program here? Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with responsibility. Dr. Vekthor, I would need a team of human physicians familiar with these techniques, facilities for hands-on training, and, most importantly, a commitment to changing how Vorthack society thinks about the relationship between healers, patients, and families. You would have all of that, Dr. Vekthor assured her. The Emperor himself has expressed interest in medical advances that could improve outcomes for our military personnel and civilian population. Admiral Gorthax, who had been observing from the military section of the amphitheater, stood up. Dr. Chen, the Imperial Fleet has officially adopted your protocols for treating combat-related neural trauma. Field medics are being retrained in techniques that emphasize emotional support alongside technological intervention. Sarah looked up at Kael'thar and Lyra Esch, seeing in their faces the love story that had started this revolution in medical thinking. What had begun as one desperate commander's refusal to accept the impossible had become a transformation that would touch millions of lives throughout the Empire. There is one more thing I want you to understand, Sarah said, addressing the assembled physicians. This approach works not because humans are superior to Vorthack, but because we have learned to see strength in things your culture has traditionally viewed as weakness. Vulnerability, dependence on others, the admission that technology alone cannot solve every problem, these are not flaws to be eliminated. They are essential parts of what makes healing possible. Dr. Lyradash spoke up from the gallery. My fellow Vorthack, Dr. Chen has taught us that the most advanced medicine is not the one with the most sophisticated technology. It is the one that remembers that patients are not problems to be solved, they are beings to be healed, supported, and loved back to health. As the assembly concluded and physicians began clustering around Sarah to discuss implementation details, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A simple frontier doctor's refusal to accept defeat had become a diplomatic breakthrough, a medical revolution, and a bridge between species. But, more than that, it had proven something that humans had always known but rarely articulated: the universe's most powerful force was not advanced technology or superior weapons. It was the simple, stubborn, magnificent human refusal to give up on someone they cared about. In the months that followed, human medical techniques spread throughout the Vorthack Empire and beyond. The success rates for treating previously terminal conditions improved dramatically. Families were trained to become active participants in healing rather than passive observers of medical procedures. The cold efficiency of technological medicine was tempered with warmth, hope, and the revolutionary idea that caring for someone was itself a form of medicine. Kael'thar and Lyra Esch became ambassadors for the new approach, sharing their story throughout the Empire as proof that love could indeed conquer what logic said was impossible. Their bond, tested by disease and strengthened by recovery, became a symbol of what could be achieved when beings refused to accept defeat. And Dr. Sarah Chen, who had once been just a frontier physician treating miners and traders on a forgotten station, became the architect of a medical revolution that proved humanity's greatest export was not their technology or their tactics, but their absolute conviction that every life was worth fighting for, no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. The human approach to medicine had not just saved one patient, it had transformed an entire civilization's understanding of what healing truly meant. In a galaxy where advanced species measured progress by technological sophistication, humanity had quietly demonstrated that the most advanced civilizations were those that never forgot the power of simply refusing to give up on each other.